I guess we're live. Christopher Armitage, Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann and Chris Armitage here to talk to the folks on Substack. And we have Danielle Rasmussen as our first person to join.
Yeah, congratulations, Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah. Y'all feel free to hit those little heart react things if you're happy to be here. I know I am.
Yeah, me too. So it's great having everybody here. So first of all, happy holidays and forward to a happy new year here. Uh, I'm curious. By the way, I want to tell you that I'm a big fan of your newsletter. I love it. In particular the in-depth dives that you do. There's so much fluff and bullshit on Substack, and increasingly so much stuff that's obviously written in ChatGPT. That it's really nice to read stuff that's clean and tight and well thought out and well researched, and I consistently get that from your Substack newsletter. So thank you. Tip of the hat for that. I'm curious your thoughts on the coming year, on where we're going with this and why. I have some thoughts on that when it comes back around to me, but let's start with
Yeah,
you.
I that is really the question of the moment. And also thank you so much. I remember being in the car when I was a kid and Air America playing and my parents talking about you. So this is my parents are both watching literally with popcorn right now.
Ah,
Yes,
well,
but
hot dad.
the coming year. So that's the question of the moment. I think what we're looking at is hopefully the beginning of the immune system of our nation enacting, and that immune system is we the people. And so I feel optimistic that as virus of MAGA and hate and fascism that continues to lay dormant in the human immune system culturally, as that inflames and becomes worse, that too will the immune response of our nation as individuals act to protect human rights and dignity and defend our nation.
How do you see that playing out? Do you have and what do you think is animating
Well, I think a lot of what is.
Trump?
Sorry, I missed the last part of that question. What was that you said?
What's animating the GOP outside of fear of Donald Trump saying bad things about them and or hurting them in a primary?
They have power. He's a mobster. I grew up in New Jersey, and I remember hearing stories about Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump, and them working with different organized crime like organizations. Donald Trump has been mobbed up his entire life because he's a guy who would just accept money from anyone without asking questions. And so it's
Yeah.
the same thing that makes people scared of the mob. I don't think anybody watching this would say to themselves, if asked the question, I don't think anybody's answer would be no. Do you think Donald Trump would have anyone killed if he didn't like them? If he had that ability, which he very well may. I mean, if the FSB or Mossad or any sort of intelligence agency was just willing to
Jeffrey
say that.
Epstein.
So yes, has he likely has had people killed. It certainly would indicate the evidence would indicate that. And so people are scared for their safety. They're scared that he has power, and he's repeatedly shown that when people challenge him, he ends up surviving. He's a cockroach, and he's managed to survive so many wars in that sense. And so yeah, it's fear, also power. I think I was thinking about the military recently. I was in the Air Force for almost a decade, and I was also a corrections officer for a period. So I've worked inside of these very hierarchical military type structures, and there are a lot of people who they just recognize that they want to go up and not stay where they are. So ambition is a surprising motivator, ambition and greed. People
Yeah.
want more money and they want more power. And if you're not willing to take the promotion, then somebody else will. And you do that for long enough, which I think the GOP's been doing for long enough that they've built that permission structure.
Yeah. My take on it is, let me put a longer range, larger frame on this thing, um, and tell a little story, if I may. Um, Back in 1951, a guy named Russell Kirk published a book called The Conservative Mind, which is still in print and is still one of the top selling books in among conservative circles. It's considered the Bible of the modern conservative movement. And in that book, the subtitle of the book is From Burke to Eliot, and that Burke is Edmund Burke, the guy who in the 1790s, he was a British economist and politician, philosopher. He was all in favor of the American Revolution, but he was opposed to anybody running it except the wealthy. He is probably his most famous quote is, "It does me no harm if a man is allowed to participate in a profession as servile as that of tallow maker, candle maker, or hairdresser, but it does society considerable violence if such a man is allowed to participate in governance by voting." So he was kind of the original, right-wing conservative. And then Eliot was T.S. Eliot, who was, kind of a right-wing crank in the 1950s when Kirk wrote this book. He's no relation to Charlie, by the way. So anyhow, in this book and in subsequent writings, Russell Kirk suggested that this huge experiment that FDR undertook in 1933, which was to create the world's first society where more than half of the people living in that society were members of the middle class. It was a huge project, right? And at that time, about 20% of Americans were in the middle class. And even the developed countries of Europe, some of them were floating into the 20 and 30% range, but it just, nobody had hit that 50%. And so Kirk was basically warning about that. This again, Edmund Burke's idea that if the democracy is essentially mob rule, if too many people who weren't properly trained at the right schools, who came from the right families, were given the ability to run a country, they would destroy the country. And he identified three things that he suggested would bring down America. Again, keep in mind, this is 1951. First, he said that if the middle class gets too large, young people will no longer be dependent upon their families, and they'll lose respect for their elders, and that will disintegrate the family. Number two, women will no longer need their husbands. They will no longer be bonded or tied to the family, in the bedroom and the kitchen, and that will destroy the American society. And number three, if Black people specifically were given full, equal financial and political rights, civil rights, essentially, then that would cause a massive disruption. And if all three of these things happened, it would be the end of American society. And he was largely considered a crank in the 1950s. I mean, Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley. Buckley wrote a famous piece for National Review, the magazine that he started in 57, I think it was, in which he just came right out and said, white people are genetically superior to Black people, and that's why they should rule America, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's easy to Google. You can find it. And Barry Goldwater, was not explicitly racist, but he was gung-ho for Russell Kirk's vision. But by and large, everybody thought he was nuts. And then came the 60s. In 1961, the birth control pill was legalized. And so by 1965, you had this full-blown women's rights movement. And by the way, the 60s was when we hit 50% in the middle class. Then you had young people saying, hell no, I'm not going to go to Vietnam. I was one of them, at that time. And so you had, young men burning their draft cards and young people rebelling and growing hair long and taking psychedelics. And then number three, you had the peak of the civil rights movement in the mid-60s. And, Martin Luther King and everything else. And when all that happened at once in the mid-60s, the Republican Party, which had been making fun of Russell Kirk up until that point, looked around and said, holy crap, he was right. He was a prophet. America is disintegrating. This is the end of the American experiment. This is the destruction of our society. And so when Reagan came into office, which was the next big opportunity, when Reagan came into office, basically at that point in time, 65 to 66% of us were in the middle class. And his job was to reduce the middle class below 50%, to restore social, political, and economic stability to the country, to save America. And he did. I mean, the first thing he did is he went after the unions. A third of us had good union jobs. My dad had a union job. He worked in a tool and die shop. And so 2/3 of America had the equivalent of a good union wage, because the union jobs set the wage floor, local wage floor for other jobs. And that's how 2/3 of us were in the middle class. So he went after that. He went after all the social programs. He cut the top tax rate from 90% down to 70, or 70% down to 28%, 25 and then 27%. Um, and quack, 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 everything else that Reagan did. He stopped enforcing the laws against corporate monopolies. He stopped enforcing, here he changed the law that had to do with corporate stock buybacks. I mean, just all kinds of wild, wild stuff that he did. And the result is that now only 43% of us are in the middle class. I mean, we've seen the middle class just collapse, and it takes two full-time salaries to produce that same middle class lifestyle that in 1980, when Reagan came into office, could be produced by one person. So when I look at the last 44 years and I look at next year and the next 3 years, I'm looking at it through the lens of understanding um, that this vision of America that Russell Kirk laid out and that William Buckley laid out and that Barry Goldwater laid out back in the day, and I knew it well. I mean, I went door to door with my dad for Barry Goldwater when I was 13 in 1964. He was a Republican activist. Is that they still believe that. They still believe that if the middle class, that if you can support, if 2/3 of us were in the middle class and we could do it with a single paycheck, which was the case 44 years ago, that we would once again be in a situation of massive social upheaval, and it would be the end of the American Republic, the end of the American experiment. So I think that a lot of these people actually think they're doing the right thing. They're helping America. They're saving America, and that's why they go after queer people. That's why they go after black people. That's why they're gung ho against brown people. It's why they go after Muslims, because those are the quote outliers to the male-dominated white society that Russell Kirk envisioned should always run America, because they're the only ones who are safe and reliable. So I'm curious what you think of that rant and how that ties in with the stuff that you've been writing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's very clear that there have been multiple movements that are focused on retaining power and gaining power for the already powerful. And I think especially for the last, I mean, since the Civil War, since World War II, all these different markers in our history, there have been points where the powerful get together and they are focused on how can we continue to accumulate more power, how can we lobby for more power, and they've never stopped lobbying for more power and trying to aggregate more of it. And for the working class, there have been so many culture war distractions and those sort. They're looking for every distraction they can give us, and sometimes the distraction is I can't pay my bills, I'm worried about putting food on the table. Those, we have more problems to deal with, while they have more capability to focus on how they can weaken the standing of their fellow humans and of the majority. And I am very certain that I would rather have mob rule than oligarch rule. I promise it would be much more fair. And so that's how I feel about that. I think, this upcoming year is this opportunity to be the immune system of our nation, of democracy, of freedom, of humanity. And how do we engage as that immune system is the big question of this moment. I think that there's been a lot of this controlled opposition around what is appropriate levels, what are appropriate levels of engagement, And so hitting the streets is great, but personally, I have a problem with filing for permits for civil engagement. I also think, no kings. Let's make it once a month and then work on making it once a week. Beyond hitting the streets, there's a couple different things that I really engage with around the soft secession model that I've been promoting, in particular around creating parallel structures and social safety nets at the city state level to make sure that do I hear a cat?
Yeah, he's here he is. This is Wolfie. He's an
Wolfie.
old man, and he's a little grouchy. Hey there, Wolfie.
Wait, I'm gonna do the same. Let me get one of my cats. Come on over here. Okay. This is Princess Nandor. She's 3, and I love
Well,
her very much.
hey there, Princess.
Oh, and here's her brother. This is he has a few names. Enron is my favorite. He's named after the company because he's very bold with the things that he likes to steal.
Yeah,
So
we have 2. We have 4 cats.
4 cats is a good number. My co-author for my book, Conservatism, America's Personality Disorder, has 5 cats. I think that's about the max that I could handle.
Yeah, there you
But
go. Yeah, my brother has 9 cats. So
wow. Well, my friend Dan is going to love you extra when he learns that you have a family member with
yeah.
nine
Well,
cats.
he lives out in the country, and his wife was worked in a vet's office for years and years and years, and they people keep dropping off feral cats and stray cats,
Yeah.
and they're like, yeah. Anyway, we
Yeah.
were talking about the fate and future of America,
The
the
soft
secondarily
secession.
important stuff.
Yeah, after cats, of course. Well, I will say too, I hope we get a chance to talk eventually about like navigating emotional well-being as you watch the bad guys gain ground. But that's a conversation I want to have later. The soft secession model that I've been working with people on is civic engagement and activism that is informed by tactics that actually work. I get to bring some different ideas to this space that are generally there. My master's degree is in Homeland Security, but did law enforcement, military, deployed as air base defense, and so I brought a lot of these strategies and tactics from the intelligence world and the combat arms world, and I've said, how could we apply these to activism? I think we need to wage psychological warfare on politicians in a legal way. The idea of, I want Ted Cruz thinking about us when he goes to sleep. I want him. We can literally decide the conversations that these politicians are having, and it doesn't take millions of people. I mean, you look at what I hope with No Kings and those sorts of events is what we really use them for is getting people more engaged in additional ways. Something that I support is daily activism, 7 days a week, finding something you can do. Keep it, within the realm that's manageable. And one day it might be social media poking on a politician and saying, why aren't you supporting, municipal broadband so we have non-tax revenue that can fund a state universal health care option? Why aren't you supporting, universal childcare in the state? Because as the federal government degrades, one way that we can fight fascism is in the places that democracy still exists, we can build structures that take care of the people. And that is my favorite way to fight fascism, actually. That's why it's called soft secession, is because we don't need to have a war to progress. We can just reach a point where in 10, 20, 30 years, we are functionally separate countries, but without needing to have a war. And then the more aggressive side of that is when you get into the anti-corruption stuff that I support and that I encourage people to engage with. Call, email, show up at the offices, all those for all these policies, but especially for the anti-corruption stuff. I want to see an interstate anti-corruption compact that even pursues corruption among federal officials. We know that these people are taking bribes. We know that they're involved in the Epstein files. We need to put them in handcuffs because truly, if we don't restore justice, then we're done for. And we can do that at the state level. There's for over 100 years, actually, there's been a broad authorization from the U.S. Congress to allow interstate compacts related to law enforcement. And so an anti-corruption law enforcement interstate compact specifically pursuing bribery and self-dealing. There's plenty of places in the US where contractors are not allowed to make political contributions because it can affect them being awarded contracts. But for some reason, Google can do that, or like an oil and gas company. And so the states can step up and pass these policies. And if the federal government doesn't like it, cool, we'll see you in court and we'll fight it for as
Mhm.
long as we can, but we're going to do it the entire time. And if you win in court, we'll tweak something slightly and then we'll go back to court for another 5 years and litigate that slight tweak. And we'll keep doing that because we need to play hard. We need to play mean with this process because the fascists aren't pulling any punches. That's where I think we go in 2026.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And state power. I think that Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker are just starting to explore the possibilities of state power. I believe it was Pritzker last week said that he was ready to start arresting ICE agents. Um, that would be interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just at an event actually with Washington State Governor Ferguson, who
Mhm.
give attention to because that guy is brilliant and doing some fantastic work and was one of the most effective attorneys general in Trump's first term.
Hmm.
And also Governor Tim Walz was there. And they were talking about things that I mean, I've heard from some of their staffers that they've taken a look at my work, and I feel like they're understanding the assignment, even if they're not going as far as we need. But something I want to stress to everyone watching this is every time they hear your voice, every time they see you at their office, every time they receive an email, every time they receive a letter, 1,000 people doing that to a governor every single day, or an attorney general every single day, or state representative every single day, they hear you and you are deciding the conversations that they have with their staff. You get to
Yeah.
decide that. And you don't need to be a 501(c)(3) to do it.
Yeah. Excellent points, all. Very excellent points. A couple of other points that I'd make in the context of our conversation about economics and democracy and the connection between the two, and fascism. I mean, the first is that, again, trying to understand the Republican worldview, is that arguably the most stable form of government, which is what the Republicans are pushing for, is essentially oligarchy. Jefferson wrote about the three historic tyrannies, warlord kings, theocrats, and the rich. And that when the three of them got together, you would have something that would be very, very difficult to overcome, which is exactly what's going on right now. But for over 1,000 years in Europe, and for arguably thousands of years before that, certainly in the Middle East, we have records. Egypt, the Egyptian Empire, whatnot. The era prior to the Greek and Roman democracy and republic. The principal economic system was that you had a very, very small, 1% at the very top who owned probably 90% of all the wealth. You had a middle class that was basically the professional class, the doctors, the lawyers, the people who served the wealthy or provided, or shopkeepers, entrepreneurs. And then you had the 95% at the bottom who were just the working poor. Charles Dickens, whose father was arrested and put in a poor home, or in a debtor's prison, wrote about this in every single one of his, or virtually every one of his novels that I've written. And use Christmas Carol, for example. Scrooge isn't even the 1%. People think that Scrooge was the rich guy. Scrooge was the middle class. He owned a small business that was so small he only had one employee, Bob Cratchit. And Bob Cratchit was the working poor, the 95%, who couldn't even afford health care for his disabled son. The top 1% don't even appear in most of Dickens' books, because that was the royal family and their cronies and big industry and, the East India Company and all that kind of stuff. And so, Republicans look at this and they go, that's how an economy should run. That small middle class that doesn't cause trouble, a large, disempowered, frightened, economically and politically disenfranchised working class who simply do what they're told, and all that sort of thing. And what flies in the face of that is not just democracy, but FDR's idea that a necessitous man is not a free man. The famous quote from his speech in Philadelphia in August of 1936, when he accepted the nomination for his second term in office. And that if you're hungry, you're not free. If you're homeless, you're not free. If you can't afford medical care, you're not free. If your kids can't go to school, you're not free, or they're not free. And that speaks to this issue of what is the natural state of humanity? What is the natural state of human governance? We tend to assume that, top-down governance is the norm, that, kings and kingdoms and the wealthy and all this sort of stuff. And this is the stuff, particularly in the GOP, that maintains the status quo and, in fact, cements the status quo, particularly among the MAGA, the follower class, the authoritarian followers that you were talking about, the people that you knew from, your time in corrections and whatnot. And years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I read an article in Nature magazine where these two scientists in the UK at the University of Essex, as I recall, Tim Roper and L. Conrad, decided to test this hypothesis that leadership in mammals, and not just humans, but in mammals, is hierarchical. And because, we all know that there's like alpha deer and, alpha wolves and, all that kind of stuff. So, is that how the society is actually organized? And so there was a forest that the university owned, and it had a herded red deer in it. And there are 3 different watering holes. and they put cameras in the trees and they observed the deer. And typically at more or less around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the deer would all go to the water hole. And this was not a small decision. If they went too late, somebody might experience dehydration, particularly the young, the old, the sick. If they went too early, they didn't get enough nutrients from grazing on whatever they eat, tree branches or buds or grass or something. And so they assumed that the alpha deer would simply, when the time came, say, okay, everybody, let's go over there. We'll pick that hole, that watering hole. And what they found was that during the course of the hour or so leading up to the time that they typically moved, the different deer would start to point their bodies toward one of the holes. And when 51% of the deer were pointed at one of the watering holes, within 5 minutes, the entire herd would form around them and go to that particular watering hole. They were literally voting with their bodies. So then they thought, well, let's up the stakes. And so they put a stuffed wolf near one of the watering holes to see, now we've got risk. So how are they going to react? And what they found was that instead, the 51% of the deer were pointing at one watering hole, but nobody moved. 55%, 58%, 60%, 62%, 64%, 66%. When they hit 66%, 2/3, all the deer went to that watering hole. So a super majority for serious decisions, which is what the founders literally wrote into our Constitution. So I called up, I wrote about this in a book called Threshold, The Crisis of Western Civilization, that I published back in 2005, I think. Random House published it. And in fact, it's still in print. And, or maybe it's not, whatever. So anyhow, I called him up and I interviewed Tim Conrad and said, so what happened when you published this article? And he was, and he said, well, it was fascinating because the first call I got was from an entomologist, a bug guy. And have you ever seen a ball of gnats just hanging in the air? Like on a nice summer day, there's like this ball, and then all of a sudden the whole ball of gnats will go zip like that. And he said they're doing slow motion photography, and what they're discovering is that when the gnats are flying, their wing beats, and if more than 51% of them wing beat 3 degrees to the right, the whole group goes 3 degrees to the right. And then he said, and then I got a call from a fish guy, an ichthyologist, and he said, we're discovering the same thing with schooling behavior in fish. I'd always assumed the fish were telepathic or something. You go scuba diving and you see that, and they're going along, and then all of a sudden, zoom, like that. Well, literally each tail motion is a vote. And he said he heard from a bird guy who said, yeah, we're seeing this with ducks and geese, with migrating birds, the exact same thing. He even found, so from insects to birds to mammals, right across the whole spectrum, nature is democratic, small d democratic. Democracy is the actual natural state. And that oligarchy that ruled Europe for 1,000 years with all the interconnected royal families and everything else was basically only able to do it through violence, through brute force, economic and physical violence. So I think that idea that you mentioned a little bit ago, the restoring democracy to America. The problem that we have is that there's a large number of Americans, and most of them are in the Republican Party right now, although not all of them. I'd probably Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin fall into this category. Just actually don't believe in democracy. They think that it's a nice, cute, quaint idea, but really, the really smart people should run things. And how do you know they're really smart people? Because they're rich. And or because they've acquired power, the ruthless people, the ones who just crushed everybody in their path to get where they are, which is what Donald Trump did economically for most of his life, and broke the rules. And so I think that we need to be talking more about democracy as the default state of humanity. My next to the last book that I wrote was called The Hidden History of American Democracy, and I went back and found all these writings from the 15th, the 16th and 17th centuries, from the missionaries who came to North America, who were living among the Indians, and writing about how democratic their societies were. Oh, and the other thing with Tim Roper, when I interviewed him, I said, well, if decisions are made democratically, why is there an alpha deer? And he said, it's Darwin, it's survival of the fittest. The alpha animal is the one that can beat the other ones, so he's got the fittest genes, so he has first choice of sexual partner. But that's it. They don't have any leadership role. They just have first choice of sexual partner. And he said, again, we're finding that fairly universally. So, I have kind of gone off on a tangent here, but I think this is pretty important stuff to be educating people about. That democracy is a thing, and that we really do need to recover it. So
Yeah,
back
I
to
think
you.
that's no, I appreciate that. It's fascinating, and I need to do more reading of your work because especially being able to integrate history and biology with how we contextualize our moment and our future is really important.
Yeah.
And I've heard people even online say well, I don't want democracy. They're stupid people. Why should they get to vote? While I would gladly support not, I would love to not share a country with Louisiana because right now they're representatives. They get two senators, just like California. I don't want to share a country with them, but if I have to, regardless, any nation I live in or any organization I'm a part of, I want it to be democratic. Not because I think everybody's going to be educated, but because if you're an adult in that place, you should have a key to power. The keys to power are how I view democracy and its value. Is the more keys to power there are, the more the people who ultimately make the decisions must go to the keys and request help. So in a dictatorship, very few keys to power. And a lot of this comes from the Dictator's Handbook. I can't remember the author's name right now, but it's really good. So in a dictatorship, there are very few keys to power. In a democracy, you spread those keys out. That creates an incentive structure for benefiting as many people as possible. And so the more they can consolidate the keys to power, the more that they're able to also consolidate the benefits that happen. They don't have to spread them out as much. Even a dictator who wants to be good to the people, if they give treasure to the people, they're not giving it to their keys. And then that means those keys might need to remove the person who's the top person. And, when you talk about the biological view of our situation, I think that, psychologically, humans largely conform to the shape of our vessels. Yes, you have morals and values, and some people are outliers, but I witnessed it a lot in the military and law enforcement that your personality can shift so much depending on the environment you're in, and the
Mhm.
evidence supports that too. You can take I remember being at the BLM protests and being, getting tear gassed and being with a group of other veterans who were like out there supporting Black Lives Matter. And remember thinking to myself, in a different, if things had gone a little differently, I would have been one of those guys with the tear gas canisters. And that's more true for me than for a lot of other people. Because when I got out of the military, I applied to a few police departments, including the one that had the tear gas canisters they were launching. I was rejected from one of the departments. They unanimously rejected me, and I cried after. And they rejected me. They let's see. A few of the questions they rejected me for was they asked, what do you think is the most important trait for an officer to have?" And I said empathy, and they laughed. They laughed at me. And but I could have, maybe I had got. There's a world where I get through their filter. Or I do more research about the answers they want to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the guys with the tear gas canisters. And I really do think, if you took most people and put them in that, those other shoes, they would behave in similar ways. So what do we do with this information? How do we make it actionable? Well, the answer is we need to change incentive and disincentive structures because those are what shape people's behavior. And so a lot of the work I'm trying to do with my audience right now, with anyone who will listen, is around we can influence politicians and elected officials and the public by engaging with pressure in positive ways. And I mean, the carrot and the stick, I regularly encourage people to find politicians who are doing good things, like the New Mexico governor who helped spearhead the process for getting universal child care for certain age groups, not means tested in New Mexico. That's the first time that's happened since the Lanham Act during World War II. I said, find this governor on social media or send them a letter or call their office. And even if you're not their constituent, thank them for serving the people and let them know that they are setting the example. If there's a state representative who's helping to get health care for people in their state or any of these policies, let's give them the carrot, some social media attention. Throw them $5 if you want to. If you live in their district, volunteer for them. And then the stick. And the stick is, we're going to try to make you unhappy. We're by making our displeasure known. We're going to be loud. We're going to be angry. We'll use these methods. You know, Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson is someone I've studied a lot for his ability to shape the behavior of the people around him. He was the his legislative agenda, 83 out of 89 bills passed while he was in his 5 years as president, is unparalleled.
Yeah.
And so I really tried to look at how Lyndon Johnson influenced the people around him. And you don't have to be Senate Majority Leader. You don't have to be President of the United States to do that. It's just being persistent and loud. And another thing, too, to talk about kind of how we shape the behavior of these politicians is donor contact. So you don't have to donate to politicians to impact money. You can contact their donors. It is 100% legal to call, email, send letters to people who have donated any dollar amount to politicians. So now you're not allowed to tell those people to vote for another candidate, but you can contact them. One person who's focused enough could cost Ted Cruz, and I pick on Ted Cruz because I hate him, could cost Ted Cruz hundreds of thousands of dollars for his next campaign. People who are like, I think I'm just going to support somebody else this time. And even if it doesn't change anyone's contributions, you can make sure that he ends up getting phone calls from angry donors, because people who've donated tens of thousands of dollars to any politician's campaign, they pick up the phone. And so when they're getting calls like, you did X, Y, and Z, and while I love it because I hate America, I would love if I wasn't getting angry calls from the public about the things that you're doing. Now you're eating up his bandwidth. You're eating up their bandwidth and their attention and their ability to do evil things. And that's part of the game. Something that Steve Bannon really recognized, and he's another person I've been studying a lot, is so the online culture of trolling is a masterful tactic to from like a strategic and psychological side, because you're getting somebody else to expend emotional energy and attention, but you, as the person winding them up, are laughing. So it's kind of filling your emotional coffer as you drain their energy and attention. That's as effective as you can get. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's a lot of what I did a little bit of wandering on that one too, but I don't know what you think about all that.
I think it's brilliant. Carmama asked, how do you find the donors?
Oh, that's all public disclosure information, fec.gov, and your states also have that information. And if you want help finding open secrets is a good one. If you want help finding that information, a week ago I would have said you can DM me or something like that. But now we have a Discord channel for the Existentialist Republic. If you need help setting up Discord, you can reach out to me. And we're working, if anyone wants to help, to set up a Reddit account, or sorry, a Reddit subreddit, because I want to help make it easier for you to get that information. If you go to most protests, the average person there, it's the majority of activists right now are retirees, and that's good in some ways, and also like I want us to help get more young people out there. But we can integrate a lot of different tools here, but it's going to take a mix of people bringing their experience and their enthusiasm, and also integrating shared open source information that we have. And so the Discord channel for the Existentialist Republic, if you need help, if you're struggling and you want to do things and you're ready to do them and you can't figure it out, and what I'm telling you hasn't been enough, you can just DM me on Substack and I'll help connect you with somebody. Because for every one person that we can educate and then get them acting to save the country, to save the world, to save their fellow humans, then that person can help recruit or train or teach or inspire others. And if we can create that multiplication engine, then I know the immune system of our country can pop Donald Trump, out of get him out of that position, and restore democracy and create a better future. I know we can do that.
It would be a fine thing. You mentioned people, basically uniforms altering behavior. And I'd like to talk about ICE for a minute, and what's going on with this police state that we have. It's a conversation I usually end up having with on my radio program when I mention this. The cops will call in. I back in the '80s, I wrote a series of 5 novels about a private detective. Only one ever got published, and it's a terrible book. Don't bother. But but I was real into it. I wanted to write novels, and I had a friend who was I was living in Atlanta, and he was formerly a small town Georgia sheriff, chief of police, and he was retired. And I followed him, and he was a private detective, and I followed him around for a couple of days. He was mostly doing insurance fraud stuff, and he said, "I can get you in the Georgia Police Academy." They had just opened it. It was 6 months before the Olympics were going to be held, and so they needed more people to be trained for security for the Olympics. And so, DeWitt and I went through the Georgia Police Academy together, and I'm a graduate, and I got a badge, and I got a gun license, and I got my private detective license for 2 years. I had it for 2 years, and one day we were doing hand-to-hand combat stuff, and this one guy just beat the crap out of me. And afterwards, DeWitt and I were sitting in the Georgia Police Academy. There's this huge atrium, and there was a group of guys that were going to be state police in uniform, marching, drill formation. And we were having lunch, looking at him, and I said, "What do these guys make?" And he's like, "Well, I think they make around 35, 40 a year." I said, "Wow, you couldn't pay me that to have people shoot at me." And he said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "Half those guys, you give them a stick or a gun and let them beat the crap out of people, they'll pay you." And that was my observation. About a third of the guys who were in my class were there for the very best reasons. The anti-Mayberry cops, they wanted to be the good guys. About another third of the people were there because it was a good job that had a pension. And then the remaining third were those people that DeWitt talked about who just really couldn't wait to get out and crack some heads. And when I look at ICE with their faces covered, and I remember, walking around with a concealed weapons permit and a weapon, and how it changes how you view everybody around you. It's like it alters your mental state. If even for the moment, just wearing a uniform, or having the legal authority to kill people, basically.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing. And it seems to me that Pritzker and Newsom both, going down this track of unmasking ICE. I mean, in my opinion, they're wearing masks for the same reason the Klan did, so that they can't be held accountable for their crimes. Well, somebody killed that guy. I don't know who it was. There was 5 guys with masks on. But you've got a law enforcement background. You've got a master's degree in this stuff.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts on all that with me, because it seems like one of the best ways that we could get this whole police state thing under control is to actually control the police, not so much the law itself. I mean, obviously we have to do all that stuff, but go ahead.
There's not a single there's a book I wrote that it's all right. It's called Bad Cop No Donut. I wrote it a few years ago, and also don't even know if you can still get a copy. But I talked about how there isn't a single police department in the entire United States that has a code of conduct that is legally enforceable, prosecutable, and written by the public
Oh,
rather than the
really?
police department themselves.
Wow.
And that seems like something that if you just told everybody that, they'd be like, "Oh no, we should decide the code of conduct for the police, and it should be enforceable, right?" That feels
Yeah.
like common sense. I wanted to mention something too related to the concept, the idea of enclosed cognition. So there's been a few different studies that are really fascinating. For example, they'll have people take an IQ test, and they'll have them take an IQ test wearing a lab coat, like a doctor, and they'll get up to 10 points better score. It's really people will do better based on the clothing that you put them in, and then they'll do better on different types of
And
creativity tests.
the score isn't based on somebody else's perception of them. The score is based on how they're performing.
Yes, it's just a standard IQ test, but they will do better the second time, or if you can take it a month apart. One study they did 6 months apart, and they would give them an IQ test over these long periods, and they would put them in different outfits like a mechanic's jumpsuit or a lab coat, and people's IQ would actually go up or down, or they would give them creativity tests after priming them. Yeah, so you can do if you would have an important test, because in your mind you tell yourself, okay, I am wearing this uniform. If you put people in a military uniform and there's somebody who subconsciously views the military as honorable and courageous, and this study hasn't been done, but the research really, really strongly supports the idea that if you put somebody in that military uniform and they respect the military, they're going to want to go behave more courageously. They probably would. They'd be more likely to save somebody's life. But the law enforcement uniform and community is something that for a long time has drawn people who have empathy disorders and
Mm.
are more grow up in environments that are much more authoritarian and hierarchical in the home. And I live in Spokane, Washington. Northern Idaho is right next to us. It's
Yeah.
the hub of American white supremacy. They tell their members to join law enforcement,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they,
They're trying
you
to
know,
infiltrate all over the country
so is my
and the
master's.
military.
Absolutely. And so I spent, just to tell people a little bit more about my background, I spent almost a decade as a federal law enforcement officer and as a corrections officer, worked in investigations, did some work around intelligence, deployed twice as part of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. And my master's degrees in Homeland Security, my undergrads are criminal justice and psychology. From all of this experience and education, my conclusion is that the most effective way to improve or repair our criminal justice system and the law enforcement mechanism within it is to disband the police departments that currently exist after we have first created a segmented and compartmentalized separate entity that is unarmed and trained to do law enforcement. So basically, you cannot have the new version of police departments be in any way connected, or else they'll develop and share culture. They can't be part of the hiring, but you just create a new thing and then you stop hiring for the old thing. And
Is
that, to
anybody
me,
doing that anywhere in the world? I mean, the British used to have unarmed cops. I remember
oh
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh, all over Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's normal in most places. That is the standard in the world is police officers don't just walk around with guns. And you know
Yeah.
that you carried. I have a concealed carry permit, but I don't carry
Mm.
because it does, which relates to enclothed cognition, like we were talking about. You have a new accessory, you have a new thing on you. This shapes your identity, it shapes your behavior. Another study relevant to this is they had people in cars. And if they were driving, you put the same person in a BMW or in some old beater, and you put them in the BMW and they start blowing stop signs and red lights
Yep.
and cutting people off, and you put them in a beater and they behave much more politely. Well, when you put that gun on somebody, you give them the badge, you give them all of that, you're changing how they're engaging with the people around them. They're seeing people as a threat. They're completely elevated. Their baseline has changed to an unhealthy place. There
Yeah.
is nowhere in the United States doing this right now, but it is normalized in other places. If I and I've made this proposal to the Spokane mayor, and she was kind enough to sit down and listen to me. But the mayor who decides to do this is going to get a lot of really positive attention. That's what I'll say. And what it is you just say, all right, police department, we're going to let you keep doing your thing, but we're freezing your hiring.
Yeah.
We're creating a second force. We're going to pay people just as well. In a lot of cities, small towns, Spokane, they pay over 100,000 starting to most cops
Hmm.
for your 40-hour work week with tons of great union benefits.
Mhm.
And if you just create that exact same thing, but you say, look, find people who've worked in behavioral rehabilitation and who've worked around behavior intervention and say, we're going to pay you six figures. You're not going to carry a gun. You're not going to be in a paramilitary uniform, but you are a first responder to all incidents. We'll give you martial arts training, extensive, 5 days a week. Let's do it. But and what's interesting is people who get that martial arts training but don't carry a gun are far less likely to choose violence as their solution. And you're just not going. As someone who was in the system and did the job, I'm telling you, there is no world where there's an amount of training that's going to drastically change how these police behave. They have gotten worse since Black Lives Matter. Most
Yeah.
police departments gained ground as a reaction to Black Lives Matter. That elected officials said, we don't want the police unions against us. So we're going to give you raises because everybody's being mean to you. And we're going to give you more. Now, there's certain places where they did make progress, and I don't want to discount that. But largely looking at the meta trend, police are worse behaved today than they were 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And the system is
So,
consolidated. Yeah. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, I only carried for one day. It was just like to have the experience. Um, but yeah, I totally get it. Here in Portland, I only sort of half pay attention to local politics, so I don't know if they did this or not, but a year or two ago, there was a huge discussion about having an unarmed, basically mental health force. A where if you call the police and the dispatcher decides that they don't need somebody with a gun, they send these people instead. You know,
Yeah.
I believe a number of cities are experimenting with that. What are your thoughts
Oh
on
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Cahoots program is one of the best ones out there, and there's over a dozen programs that are sending people. My and what I say that expand that, more of that, pair it with hiring freezes on police departments.
that? Yeah.
We need to, starve the beast, Ronald Reagan style. We need to starve the beast that is modern law enforcement culture. It does not happen unless those departments are closed. They just we it's they are a tool of authoritarianism. They are allowed to treat human beings as enemy combatants everywhere they go. I mean, I remember in training, and this is real. I really want people to listen to this. When we were in training, we had this training department, amazing people, and they cared about us so much because most of them were retired from our job. And so they're old enough to be our parents, and they're seeing us go out there as young military police officers. And so part of the training involved showing us videos of police officers being gunned down, real videos of an officer walking up to a traffic stop, somebody stepping out of the car with a gun and goom, 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 gunning them down with a shotgun as the officer screams. And they show video after video of that.
Mm.
And that's also at semi-annual and quarterly training. And they show you that because they don't want you to die. But that is not how we need to be thinking of, like, that is so rare. Did you know a pizza delivery driver is more likely to be injured or harmed physically in the line of duty than a police officer in the United States?
Yeah, I know they're not even in the top 10 most dangerous professions. I mean, garbage.
Especially if you take especially if you take out traffic accidents, collisions, then they're definitely not in the top, especially, further
Yeah,
away.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting stuff.
I know I was getting
So,
emotional during that because it's really a lot of people who do actually have good intentions, and if, like I just said, if we change the shape of the vessel, we can have better outcomes. And that's where the Cahoots program in Portland, and there's great one. There's a few great programs in Colorado. We just expand those. We don't need to. We're not reinventing the wheel. These things already exist, and we can promote them
yeah,
more.
yeah. What's your sense of where Trump's power is going? It certainly is increasingly looking like he's frantic. He's out of control. He's scared. Um, he's and I think he's probably spent most of his life kind of in that state. Um, but it I'm just amazed by how rapidly how much stuff he was able to get done as quickly as he could during the first 7 8 months, and now how rapidly he seems to be collapsing.
Yeah.
And now other people say no, he's not collapsing at all. He might have a few things back, but look at all how he's transformed America and the world, the way the world looks at us, and all this kind of stuff. Um, I'm I'm just really torn on. I published a piece a couple of weeks ago that was real optimistic, and then I followed it with a piece that was real pessimistic because I can see both sides of this argument. Your thoughts, Christopher? Chris?
Yeah. Well, and I can really relate to the oscillating between optimism and pessimism pretty rapidly. I as far as Trump's, I'm actually a little bit concerned that when Trump inevitably dies, which at his age, I know people talk about his health, but just from an actuarial standpoint, I think it's about a 4.9% annual chance. So you could roll a 20-sided die, and if it lands on a 20, then that 2026 might be the year if you get a 20 on that 20-sided die. But I'm a little bit worried that once he's gone, a lot of he's like a lightning rod for anger and for activism, but he's also a lightning rod for people who support him but do not care about politics at all besides that. And so we're headed into some really uncertain times regardless. The goal of the Republican Party for 50 years at least has been single party rule. electoral autocracy. And among, like the VDem Institute director, their 2026 report hasn't, 2025 report that comes out in 2026, it hasn't come out yet, but he said in interviews that we are not a democracy anymore. We're an electoral autocracy. The consolidation is happening. This will outlive Trump. The Republicans do not want the voters that disagree with them to decide elections. They only want the voters who agree with them to decide
Well, it's why they're
elections.
purging 5-10 million people every 2 years from the voting rolls.
Yeah. And waiting for elections. Vote, please vote. But waiting for elections is foolish if that's the only tactic. And we need to do a lot more than hitting the streets. So once he's gone, I hope that the people still get out, because it's, I remember listening to you when I was young, and a lot of other people who were speaking. Kurt Vonnegut, someone who I got to see him speak at Binghamton University when I was young. My parents took me to that, and it was but they were talking about all of this. They were talking about, hey, we're waging in 1998, System of a Down's first album, the song Sweet Pea and song War. They talk about the United States is an oligarchy, and the corporations are funding wars against foreign nations, and they're trying to turn our entire country into a prison. In 1998, they were saying that stuff. You've been saying that stuff. All these people have been saying this exact thing. When the Patriot Act got passed, I remember people saying we're cooked. So it didn't just start, and it didn't start with Trump, and it's not going to end with Trump. And we can't stop fighting. We can't stop opposing. We need to build and grow and develop, because the oligarchs and the corporations are not going to give up power voluntarily. And so Trump, is he on the way out? I try not to think about it. When it comes into my head, I say no. The work remains the same, and I'm here for it. And even if we were guaranteed to lose, there's nothing else I'd rather be doing than fighting fascism. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I'm with you on that, Chris. I wrote a book called The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, and doing the research for that, dug into the South. And there's a guy, Forrest McDonald, who's a professor of history at the University of Alaska, University of Anchorage, or whatever it is, who wrote just a brilliant book about this stuff. That in it was 1897, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, but he didn't get financing to really market it and manufacture them at scale until the 1810s. And they were very expensive. One machine could do the work of 50 enslaved people of cleaning cotton, which is the most laborious, labor-intensive part of the process. And so only the largest plantations could afford to buy one, and which gave them a 50-to-1 advantage over their small competitors. And over a 30-year period, from the early 1820s up until the 1850s, they just wiped out economically all of their competitors. And most of the small farmers ended up being sharecroppers, basically selling their land to the giant plantations and then working for them as serfs, essentially. And by the mid 1850s, there was no more democracy at all in the South. Every newspaper editor who was fighting against, or who was speaking out in favor of democracy, had either been run out of the South, or had been lynched, or had been imprisoned, or had been intimidated. Newspapers were shut down. Opposition politicians didn't happen. The southern half of America by 1855 was literally completely an oligarchy, an autocratic oligarchy, a brutal fascist government. And, it took 700,000 deaths to recover from that. And I remember when we lived in Georgia back in the 80s, my son was at that time 7, 8 years old. And one night at dinner, we were talking, and I said, "What'd you learn in school today?" And he said, "Oh, today we learned about the War of Northern Aggression." It's like the lost cause lives on, right? And this was suburban Atlanta. This was in Marietta. And I'm so concerned that history seems to be repeating itself. That this whole, Trump bringing back the statues, Trump naming once again naming the military bases after the Confederate generals. These were people who had an open disdain for democracy that went way beyond Edmund Burke, and that's the kind of Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, Russell Vogt mentality is, we're in charge, damn it, and we're going to run this thing, and the rest of you are just serfs here. And I get it that there's like 20-30% of the population that thinks that that's good and normal and healthy. And so it seems to me like our biggest work is to wake people up. But I love your idea of creating these like keys to power or
Yeah.
accessing them and building them in the States. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And that's I'm my career is like this history of going into spaces and trying to change the system from within and realizing that I needed to leave or it would change me in ways I didn't really wanted, you know, that I mean, I remember
mhm,
when I was a corrections officer, I had to leave that job because I was losing my sense of humor and it was really impacting me in some very negative ways. And for 6 months after, it took me about 6 months to just be myself again.
yeah.
And but where you and I sit is I see us as educators and communicators of ideas that we hope to like, what is a teacher isn't the one who changes the world. They help hand people things so that they can go grow that and learn it and share it, and that's what I hope to do is just help educate people and share information and connect people so that we can have all the things we want, and this can be this generation, the people alive on earth right now, we can be the ones to tear down fascism, to dismantle it, or at least to kick it into the dirt long enough to build something that really takes care of people.
Yeah, well said. And on that note, we've been going for an hour. We should probably wrap it up. But Chris Armitage, it's great meeting you, great talking with you, and I'll continue reading your stuff.
Thank you. And you came out with you did you come out with a book recently?
Yeah, the last American president.
Last American President, A Broken Man, a Corrupt Party, and a World on the Brink
Yeah.
by Thom Hartmann. If you're watching this, you should totally get Tom's book. And if you haven't
Yes.
already,
Sign up for
yep.
Chris's newsletter if you aren't already, and if you are the a paid subscriber.
Hey,
All
well,
righty, Chris.
and yeah, take it easy. It was a pleasure, Tom. All right.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Great talking with you.
Back at you.
Bye now. I don't know how to turn this off, so I'll just kill the stream.